cough, we're not ready.
We got a few minutes. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this event for the Messiah Festival of the Arts. We're glad we have a good turnout. Hope the weather didn't keep too many people away. We would request, if you have your cell phones, please turn them off so that we don't get any kind of interruption with that. Can you hear in the back okay? Yes. All right, very good. My name is Bill Gusenius, and I have had an interest in the Messiah Festival for many, many years. About a year ago, I started thinking about this type of a program, and I thought that Tom Holmquist would be a really good resource for it. I'm a Bethany grad from 1973, and I live here in Lindsborg and have for most of my life, almost all of it. And as I said, have developed quite an interest in the college and in the Messiah Festival in particular. So, Tom?
My name's Tom Holmquist. I'm from Smolin. I'm a 1976 Bethany grad and really interested in local history and our churches and all over the Smoky Valley. And so I really hope you enjoy this presentation tonight about altars, paintings in the Smoky Valley. Bill?
Thank you. You know, as I said, I started thinking about this about a year ago during Holy Week last year, and I thought I had an original idea, but I didn't. Once I got into this, I found out that there had been similar things done before. Janet Munson at Bethany Church had done quite an extensive research on altar paintings, not just in the Smoky Valley, but throughout the Midwest. In addition, about 20 years ago, I think in 2002, the Sansein Gallery did a nice little brochure on the art relics and pieces throughout the churches of the valley, not just the altar paintings, but also other things in each church. And some of those will be available for those who might want to take this tour on Saturday. There will be a host at each of the churches, and they can go into detail beyond what we see in the here tonight. Thanks to several people before we get started. As I mentioned, Janet Monson for her research. Rosemarie Wallen at Bethany Church provided information to us. Alan Lindforce at Elam and Marquette. Ron, Michael, and Corey North at the Sansein Gallery. Jim Turner for going around with us one afternoon and taking photos of all of the altar paintings that you'll see this evening. Frank Ballou from the Bethany Publications Department. Dan Masterson, who's hiding in the back room running the electronics for this now, but he's been very helpful for us. And my wife, who put together the design for the poster that Frank then published. So thanks to all of those people. Slide, please. This is actually complementary to the Midwest Art Exhibition, which has been part of Bethany history for over 100 years, actually since 1899. This is just a brochure that the gallery put together on the 100th anniversary back in 1999. But it provided a great deal of background information on the three founders of the Midwest Art Exhibition, who coincidentally are the three artists that we're going to be focusing on tonight. And maybe it's not so coincidental, because they were all certainly well-known artists in their own right at the time that they put this together and over the coming years. Slide. So the Midwest Art Exhibition's been around for a long time, and we believe this was part of the exhibition that was held in Old Main. And if you look in the background, you'll see that there is an altar-size piece of the Good Shepherd. We don't know where or if that was ever placed in a church, but it's just an interesting fact that that type of thing was on their minds way back then. The three founders of the art exhibition, as I said, are also the people who are going to be viewed this evening for the various pieces of art that they produced. We're quite familiar, of course, locally with Birger Sansein and with G.N. Malm to a certain extent. Now, Carl Latave, or Latave, there's different pronunciations of the name, was a really interesting character, and Tom's going to tell you some stories about him after a little bit. But, slide please. As part of this, we also wanted to address the fact of why are there altar paintings? And one writer that we looked at said that he could think of three reasons: reflection, reminder, and reverence. And I think that's a good lesson to learn, or a good thought to have as one is sitting perhaps during a prelude in church, contemplating the details of an altar painting. What does it mean to you? What sense of reverence does it bring to you? So that's just one person's opinion. But then also we wanted to address a little bit about the painting of a number of altar paintings in that period of time. It was kind of in the early 1900s throughout central Kansas, and actually throughout the entire central Midwest, was sort of the high period for those altar paintings being done. You may not see a lot of modern churches who even have altar paintings, but through that period of time you certainly did. And Birger Sansein, again, one of his quotes in discussing churches in that period of time, said that beauty, style, and simplicity were attributes of many of the early Swedish American congregations. Even though they might be small congregations, he was impressed with the beauty of the simple sanctuaries that he was in. During that period of time, Sansein was, of course, starting to be involved in altar painting. Some of the other gentlemen that we'll talk about here in a little bit were also as involved, but it became somewhat provincial. And I want to read this from an article that Sansein wrote in 1903 entitled "Our Swedish American Art Schools." This isn't an exact quote, I guess, but in this essay, congregations were reproached for sometimes ordering high altars from German and American workshops which produced objects not in keeping with Swedish American tastes. And that quote was also followed by a man named Gustav Andrén, who at the time was the president of Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And Andrén's statement was that the college president politely urged Swedish Lutheran congregations to buy their altarpieces from an artist and fellow Swede rather than from large factories or from craftsmen of questionable proficiency. Now, there's another little aside to Gustav Andrén that Tom's going to talk about here, because even though he was the president of Rock Island, Illinois, or Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, he had ties to the Salemsburg area. So Tom's going to talk a little bit about that.
Gustav Andrén was one of 7 children in his family. Pastor Andrén was a very prominent pastor in the Augustana Synod back in Illinois, and he and his wife both died suddenly. And so those 7 children then went to live with Mrs. Andrén's sister, who was, her sister was Wilhelmina Dahlstein, Pastor Dahlstein's wife. They were both Espings of all people. And so the Andrén children came out here and grew up here in the Salemsburg parsonage, which at that time was little more than a dugout. And so Gustav Andrén, as the oldest, came and he taught school at District 24, which we'll see a picture of here in a little bit, and then came to Bethany, finished his work here at Bethany, and then went from there to Yale, and graduated from Yale and also taught there for a while before he took over the Augustana College in Rock Island. And so then also his eldest sister, who was just a year younger than him, was classically trained as a young girl back in Illinois, and when she came out here, she was a soprano, and Alma Swenson recruited her to be the first soprano soloist for the Messiah.
Now we're going to get to the actual artists themselves. As I said, many of you are quite familiar with Birger Sansein. Born in Bledsburg, Sweden in 1871, studied at the Artist League in Stockholm, came to Bledsburg in 1894, and a lot of people don't realize he was not hired for his artistic ability. He was actually an instructor in languages and voice rather than teaching art at that time. However, 5 years later, he replaced Karl Letov, who we'll also hear about here in a little bit, as the chair of the art department when Letov left Bethany to go to Colorado Springs. He did a number of altar paintings. We've got them estimated at 25 to 30, several of which you'll see photographs of as we go through this program. And of course, his paintings are highly valuable at this point. However, they weren't always. This is just for interest. If somebody wants to come up and look at this later, in my old files at my office downtown, one of the items that was in those old files when I took over the practice was an inventory of the art pieces that Birger Sansein owned at the time of his death. And so if anybody wants to browse through this later, they're welcome to do it. The gallery has a copy of this. But when you see his prints at 50 cents or $1, and his oil paintings at $25 as a valuation. I think it's 19 pages, single-spaced front and back. So it might be of interest to somebody who might want to look at that. Slide. The next person that we're going to talk about is G.N. Malm, Gustav Nathaniel Malm, who was born in Jönköping, Sweden, and in 1889 he came to this country, but he originally came to Omaha, Nebraska, and he was there for 5 years. In 1894 he came to Linsport. He was a businessman. Malm Brothers Painting and Stencil Company was quite a well-known operation, employed about 20 people in the business, which was located downtown in the building where the Farm Bureau Agency is right now, and had a lot of locals who worked for him and with him. In addition to being a businessman, he was also an author, wrote a full-length novel called Charlie Johnson, Svensk American, and a playwright. He wrote a play called Harute in 1919, which literally translates to Out Here. And both of those publications had to do with the adjustment of Swedish Americans as they came to this country, particularly with their language. It's estimated that he did about 30 paintings, altar paintings. He was very involved community-wise, one of the founders of Messiah Church, very involved in the development of Presser Hall, Coronado Heights, and so on. And for those of you who have not, seen this or not aware of it, Emery Lindquist did a biography of G.N. Malm, which, if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so if you want to update yourself on a little local history. Many of you also might remember his daughter Alba Malm Holmquist, who lived just cat-a-corner from the Science Hall over here on the west of Deer Hall. And the third of our founders was a gentleman named Karl Letov, who, as I said, was quite the character, and Tom's going to tell you a little bit about him.
Karl Letov was born in Jönköping in Sweden. Yeah, and he studied at the Art League School with Sanzane in Stockholm. He came here to Bethany in 1897 and was here just for 2 years between 1897 and 1899. He was mostly known as a portraitist, both in Europe and here in the United States, and became very famous for his portraits of World War I era personalities, including King Albert of Belgium, General John Pershing, and Paul von Hindenburg from Germany. And then among his most notable works that are found some beautiful paintings that are still hang today in the Governor's Palace in Santa Fe. But if you will look him up, oftentimes on Wikipedia or somewhere, the first thing that is mentioned about him is that he is the painter of the great altar painting at Salensburg Lutheran Church, Smolin, Kansas. We will learn a little bit more about him. And the next slide, please. When he died in 1924, he was cremated, and he was buried at the top of Pikes Peak. And on his gravestone up there on the top of Pikes Peak, I knew a man in whose art lived and died, and so on and so forth. When they placed this memorial for him up there on the Pikes Peak, the Denver Symphony Orchestra came to the top of Pikes Peak to play for him. He was an extraordinary man and internationally known.
Okay, a couple of other artists of interest, even though they are not directly involved in the local churches. This is a gentleman by the name of Jonas Olof Grafström. He studied with Anders Zorn in Stockholm as a young man, again born in Sweden, came to this country to Portland, Oregon in 1886, and he served on the Bethany College faculty from 1893 to 97. Then in 1897, he moved to Augustana College, again in Rock Island, Illinois, and basically became the Sanzane of the art department at Augustana. He taught there for 30 years. an extremely prolific altar painter. It's estimated that he did 150 to 200 altar paintings throughout the Midwest. And in many cases, I think he was an inspiration to some of the other artists. Slide. Here is a photograph of his art class when he was teaching at Bethany, and if you look in the background, you note that there are two very large paintings that could well have been altar paintings that he was working on at that point. And this is one that he did that is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in a church there. And then there is another one on the next slide that is in Lake City, Minnesota. And you see that very, very familiar scene that we see throughout a number of these altar paintings. The reason we see that scene is due to a man by the name of Heinrich Hoffmann, a German born in Darmstadt, Germany. He doesn't have any direct local connection that we're aware of, but this is probably the most widely copied painting in the world. You'll see this throughout religious art. The view of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane prior to his crucifixion. The original of this particular painting was purchased by a collector in San Francisco. It survived the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 and was eventually purchased by John D. Rockefeller as part of the construction for Riverside Church in New York. And if you are in New York and are so inclined, this painting is available for viewing at Riverside Church. He also ended up purchasing 3 other Hoffmann paintings. He fell in love with him, I guess, but he could afford to do so. And I found an interesting quote about why this painting has become so popular as an altar piece. And if you bear with me, I'm going to read from this art critic's commentary. The spiritual drama of Gethsemane is emphasized with spotlighting and the intense wringing of hands, yet Christ's sensitively rendered face remains placid. The features of the garden have been reduced to flinty stones and a prickly thorn bush that prefigures a crown of thorns. The picture's success lies in the appropriateness of its tone, the transformation of abject agony into a palatable scene of devotion. That's a little more flowery than what I would say, but give me an honest opinion. How many people have seen a painting like this? And if you have, how many have noticed the thorn bush? Okay, a couple back here have. Yep. Okay, I think at this point we're ready to move on to the actual churches themselves, and we're doing this just in the same order that this tour for Saturday is set, although people can join the tour wherever they want, spend as much time as what they want on any of them. But right down the street is Messiah Church, which was founded in 1908. This building was constructed in 1912, and at the time, G.N. Malm was, as I mentioned earlier, one of the founding members of Messiah Church. He was commissioned to do the painting in 1912, and again, it's the scene of the Garden of Gethsemane, a little lighter than is the Hoffmann painting, but exactly the same scene as you can see here. In addition to the altar painting, Messiah Church is also in possession of a couple of other paintings that might be of interest. And Tom wants to talk about this one a little bit. He's got some personal contact with this.
This church is Bethel Evangelical Lutheran Church down in Vilas, which is just about 15 miles west of Chanute. It was organized in 1872, and the church, what does it say? The church closed in 2003. But this church was very badly damaged by a tornado, and after the tornado, they rebuilt the church. And in 1950, if we go to the next picture, in 1950, this is one of the very last Sanzane altar paintings. And this is, again, Christ in Gethsemane, but a much brighter version of that. My personal connection is that is actually through my wife, Marla Sue. She has relatives down there, and her parents were married in that church. And when Bethel Lutheran closed in 2003, the painting was given to the Sansein Gallery, and the print hangs in the Messiah Lutheran Church on loan from the gallery, and we hope that is one that you will stop and see on Saturday in the hallway there.
Yeah, one thing you're going to hear throughout this evening is tornadoes hitting churches and other structures, and fires hitting churches and other structures, unfortunately. Also at Messiah Church, on loan from the Sansein Gallery, is this painting, which was a Sansein done in 1901 and which hung in the St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Tribune out in western Kansas. And when that church closed, see, I'm trying to remember, is the date on there? Yeah, 99. The congregation decided to donate that to the Sansein Gallery as well. So that also is hanging in Messiah Church. That one is right above the pulpit. The previous one is hanging just going down the stairway from the sanctuary down into the fellowship hall. And if any of you have a chance to stop at Messiah, take a look at those. There's also kind of a hidden treasure at Messiah Church, which unless you have been involved with the Sunday school program there, you would not ever see. And this is the one exception to the 3 artists that we previously mentioned in the altar painting rotation. This is a children's altar which has been used since sometime in the late 50s, perhaps as late as 1960. It was provided by Bill and Marion Taylor. Many of you might know them. Of course, many of you would know Bill Taylor Jr., their son, former mayor here in town. They commissioned this to be completed to commemorate the death of their daughter, Linda, who died in 1953. And the artwork on it, the painting, was actually done by John Basher, who was a Bethany College professor from 1954 to 1966. The altar itself, which we can see, I think, a little better on the next slide, was built by a gentleman here in town named Carl Teed. And I don't know how many people here in town would remember Carl Teed, but he framed many, many paintings throughout the town and acted as a carpenter and a woodworker. Actually lived right across the street from my grandpa and grandma. The cross and the candlesticks were made by Malcolm Esping, also as part of the same project that the Taylors commissioned in memory of their daughter. So there are actually 5 different items to see at Messiah Church on this. Oh, this is the last one, yeah. Tom, do you want to talk about the frame on this? No, go ahead. Well, I can't even pronounce the word. But let me talk about the painting first. Again, it's the same painting. It's done by G.N. Malm. And it's our understanding that he used this as sort of a traveling exhibit when he would go out to talk to congregations about possibly doing an altar painting. This was his sales pitch, was to take this painting along. And if you notice the frame,
the frame is done in pyrography. There was a Sloyd teacher here in the first few years of the 1900s named Amelia Rabinius, and she taught many of the practical arts here at Bethany College, and she even had G.N. Malm and Berger Sansein as students in her class along with her middle school students that she was teaching this to. But this is wood burning, and it is beautiful work, and sometimes you'll find around this area, you'll find different shelves or tables or chairs. There's a couple at Bethany Lutheran Church that have this pyrography on it, and it is part of that old Sloyd movement from the first part of the century for Bethany. And
next we'll move on to Bethany Lutheran Church on Main Street, of course. The the first congregation actually in Lindsborg, the founding congregation of Bethany College, and the Messiah Festival, of course, well known to all of you. A view of the interior, if you note, there is the central altar, which has a painting by G.N. Malm. There are two large side paintings, both of which were done by Sansein. And the altar itself was also designed by G.N. Malm and is quite intricate in some of the woodwork. And I think maybe the Holmquist brothers built that. I'm not totally sure about that. But Malm designed it, I think, and then they built it. And then we'd look at the two on the sides, Lazarus Awakening. By the way, all of these paintings that we have information on, we've included the Bible verse that gives rise to it. I should have mentioned that earlier. And then the second panel is the Ascension, also done by Sansein. All three of these paintings were done in 1904, and that was a big year for Bethany Church. It's my understanding that's the same year that they added the north and south transepts to the building. It's also the same year that they hosted the Augustana Synod Convention and ended up with the new altar and with these other paintings, all and other stained glass windows as well. So, slide. Now, here we're starting to get into the Trinity Methodist Church, but this is an introductory slide to it.
This is District 24, which this schoolhouse stood a mile south of Smolin there on the corner of McReynolds and Burma Road. And this was the original Methodist church. There was the Selmsburg, and then 1 mile north of Selmsburg was the Mission Hill Church. And then a mile north of that was then this church, which they met in District 24 Schoolhouse, and it was called Schoolhouse Methodist. And so there may have been a building before this, but this building was standing in 1892 when the tornadoes came and destroyed Smolin, and this building was destroyed along with that. So then the congregation moved to Lindsborg here in 1877, and they joined together with the Methodist Episcopal congregation that had started here to turn it into Trinity United Methodist Church there in 1877.
And I think you had mentioned to me too, Tom, isn't that the schoolhouse that Gustav Andreen taught at?
Same one, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, this is the Trinity United Methodist Church building now, which is on South Main, and which is the successor to that merger that Tom just talked about. One of the paintings in that, again, is the Birger Sansein Ascension. That is from 1919, as are the other two paintings that are involved there. This is actually kind of difficult to see when you first walk in because it's above the altar area, almost in a little kind of alcove up above there. But that one was done by G.N. Malm, again in 1919, and here is the other Sansein, again back to that familiar motif of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. Lori Swift provided me some information on the Methodist Church, and there's a quote from the Lindsborg News Record in 1919 that one cannot enter this building without realizing that an artist in the true sense of the word has had charge of the interior decoration. And it's here that we must give due credit to Mr. G.N. Malm and the firm of Lindquist Brothers. Now, I think Lindquist Brothers included Harry Lindquist, who was Emery Lindquist's father, and his brother, who would have been Emery's uncle. I think that is correct. I'm not going to bet the farm on it, though. Okay, our next church is Fremont Lutheran Church, which was also founded in 1869, and which Tom's book on the history of Salemsburg Church has some interesting information about this. Those two churches, which are roughly 15 miles apart, shared a pastor. And A.W. Dahlstein would preach at Salemsburg, for example, then he would walk to Fremont and preach at Fremont. And I think you've said often tying his shoes around his neck so he didn't wear his shoes out. Then after a couple of years, the congregation saw fit to provide him a horse so he could get there a little quicker. This is the third building of Fremont Church. The original stone church still stands right in front of it. The second church, again, struck by lightning and burned down in 1926, I believe. Yeah, and then this building was completed in 1927. And the altar painting in it is, again, a Sansein altar painting. What's interesting about this painting is that it was actually funded by their Luther League, by their youth program, who paid Birger Sansein $400 for this painting to be placed into the church. And that seems to be quite a commitment for a youth group to be able to put together that type of funding on their own. And I think there were also some figures on the frame for it. Cost something like $31, and the Luther League paid for that as well. So our next church is going to be Elam Lutheran Church in Marquette, and at this point Tom's going to take over and talk for a while.
This is Elam Lutheran Church, Marquette. It was organized in 1879 as Marquette Swede Lutheran Church. It is a daughter congregation of Fremont, and the structure was built and completed in 1880, but then it was destroyed by the tornado of May 8th, 1905. And here is the same church the day after the tornado. The tornado in Marquette that day was the second worst tornado ever in Kansas in terms of people killed. The only worst one was the one in Udall in 1957. And 28 persons were killed in Marquette, which is a huge portion of their population at that time. This is the church that replaced that church then, Elam Lutheran Church in Marquette. And this building was erected in 1906 after the tornado. And above the altar are the words, and I will say, "Glory to God in the highest," because my Swedish is embarrassing. So, there are two paintings there, both by G.N. Malm, done in 1906. Here's the Good Shepherd. And we see this motif and this painting in numerous paintings of both G.N. Malm and Sansein. This was placed after there, and it was, go back one slide, Carol. It was J.M. Carlson purchased the Elam paintings for the church after the tornado. And they are, if you go down the left aisle of the sanctuary there's one there on the wall, and then there's one in the room behind it. So I want you to be sure and know that if you go on the tour that you will be able to see both of these beautiful paintings. Here is the Good Shepherd, and then Jesus with the children. They're really, really nice G.N. Malms from 1906. Go ahead. Then up the road is the Fallen Lutheran Church. Fallen Lutheran Church was organized in 1886. There was a free church there beforehand, but it was a mile to the east of where it stands today, where the Fallen Cemetery is. And when the railroad came through in 1886, it made more sense for the railroad to place the tracks where they are, or where they were. And so then Fallen moved from where the cemetery is to where it is today. They picked up this building there, and they started out on November 19th of 1887, and it took them 2 weeks to move it. And on December 1st of 1887, they placed it on the foundation where it lays today. Inside is one of the very earliest of the Sansein altar paintings, and it is absolutely magnificent. This is Christ in Gethsemane from 1899. This was just the first year Sansein was here at Bethany. And you can see how similar it is to the painting that's in the Riverside Church in New York. Very, very similar. And it was purchased by Fallen Church for $102.85 and then installed in the sanctuary in 1905. Then we move up the road from Fallen to Selinsburg. This is the Selinsburg Lutheran Church. This is known as our Spire Church. Selinsburg was organized as a sister congregation with Fremont in 1869. with Pastor A.W. Dahlstein serving both congregations. This Spire Church is the third building that was on this site. There was a dugout church, and then there was a small prairie frame church, and the population grew so fast that they built this magnificent building in 1893 with Pastor Carl Wallin was pastor there, and it was completed in 1898. That spire was 160 feet in the air. You could see it from downtown Salina, and you could see it from Lindsborg. Next, this is the interior of that church, and it must have been magnificent. And I think some of that stenciling is some G.N. Malm stenciling. I don't know for sure, but I think so. Then above the altar, it says, this in Swedish, "This is my son, listen to him." And this painting, the Transfiguration, was the Karl Latov that he was commissioned to do in 1897. In July 25th of 1925, the Selmsburg Church, that tall spire, was struck by lightning. And there were some men that crawled up into that high spire and to try to chop the spire off so they could save the church, but they failed. But then some other men, Pete and Carl Brax among them, went into the church, and with their pocket knives, they cut that altar painting off the wall and carried it out of the burning church. And so then they were so terribly upset about this whole thing that when they built the new church, this one that stands here today, there's two towers. You know, the old church had one tower. But what had happened was that 6 weeks before this fire, they had decided to go and start having services in English. And they were convinced that the church was struck and burned to the ground because they had sinned and were no longer having church in God's language. So when they built this church, they hedged their bets. On the left tower, it says, "A mighty fortress is our God" in English. On the right tower, it says, "A mighty fortress in our God" in Swedish. And the tradition for many years was that on happy occasions like a baptism or a wedding, you entered by the Swedish tower. On sad occasions, you entered by the English tower. We don't really follow that anymore, but we love this story. Next picture. Inside, and this church also was built to house this painting. This is the Transfiguration of Christ by Karl Latov. It was commissioned in 1897 and completed in 1898. And it is considered among his great masterpieces of all the works that he did. And it is just a magnificent painting. Next slide. Here is more of a close-up to it, and you can see that Elijah and Moses are up there in the clouds with the transfigured Jesus, and it is an extraordinary thing, and something that we're extremely proud of. The side panels were done by G.N. Malm to complement the altar painting. Well, I took this apart and put these two side panels together, and this is supposed to be the Transfiguration Mount. And you know what it looks like to me, and I'm pretty sure, is that this was one painting. Look at it. It's one painting, and they cut it to fit the altar, the side panels on the altar. Isn't that interesting? We never figured this out in all these many years, but we did this. Then go back one, Carol, would you? Then in 2019, when we celebrated our 100th anniversary, we had the Transfiguration painting cleaned, and the person who did the cleaning kept wondering why there was bird droppings on the painting. Well, the painting laid for 2 years in the horse barn out behind the church. And of course, it got birds in the horse barn, and it didn't get really completely cleaned off until 2019.
I think it's because they started doing services in England.
But whatever it is, it's a great story. Okay, go ahead, please. This is the Hallville Swedish Lutheran Church, also known as Hallville Chapel, which is over east of Bridgeport and south and east of Assyria. And there's a couple people here who have ties to Hallville. And this is the painting that was in there, and you can see this is the best picture we have of this, but it is the Good Shepherd again, circa 1915. And when the Hallville Chapel closed in 1933, the painting was moved over, and when they rejoined back into Assyria Lutheran Church, and here we are at Assyria Lutheran Church here, which was organized in 1876. It was a daughter congregation of Selinsburg. But the reasons a number of these congregations were formed, it was just too dadgum far to walk to get to church. And so Assyria was organized because it was just too far to Selinsburg. Smolin Lutheran was organized for the same reason, for the people who lived up north of Smolin toward Bavaria. Hallville, the same way. Hallville was organized, it was just too far to get to Assyria, to church. So all of these different Lutheran churches were around, and then of course there was St. Paul's up there northeast of Metter as well. Next slide, please. And here is that painting, The Good Shepherd, 1914. This is G.N. Malm, and the painting is now displayed in the Assyria Lutheran Church Fellowship Center, and we hope that you can go over there and see this one as well. You notice that we've seen several of these different variations on this theme of the Good Shepherd, and some of them are very, very close. A little bit of color changes, but almost identical to each other. Next slide. Here is, this is also from that, and you can see J.N. Malm's signature there from 1914. Go ahead. So let's circle back down to Lindsborg. This is the Covenant Church, first organized in 1874 north of town at the Rose Hill site. The Dome Church was built here in town in 1877, and we didn't want to leave the Covenant Church out because did they have an altar painting? And so Marla Sue and I stopped there a few Sundays ago to ask, did we miss something? Because we certainly didn't want to leave out the Covenant Church. And did we miss it? And so we went inside and we checked with some ladies, and they said, well, Ruth Peterson will know. And so sure enough, Ruth showed up out in the parking lot just a few minutes later, and so we stood and talked to her, and Ruth said, you know, that painting was here, and I don't know what happened to it. We have been looking for that painting for all these years since this church was torn down and the present church was built in 1929. Next slide, please. Here is that painting. It's another one of the Good Shepherd, isn't it? Very, very similar to the one in the Hallville Chapel. And Ruth told us when the church was torn down in 1927, the altar painting was lost or given away. Its location was lost for decades. Here it is. Next slide, please. So we got online, Marla Sue got online, and she put this picture on the right up, and within just a few hours, Kevin Larson from up in the Westmoreland and Leonardville area came back and said, I know where that painting is. The altar painting was given to the Randolph Covenant Church, and it was installed there in 1929. And then when Randolph Church Covenant closed in 1960, because Tuttle Creek was flooding the valley. The painting was then given to their pastor, Nathan and Mrs. Noreen, and when they retired to where their daughter was living in Lafayette, Indiana, they took the painting with them. So where's the painting? Next slide. We found it. Marla Sue got online, and she got on with Ashley Anderson Swan, who is Dave and Nancy Anderson's granddaughter. And it took a couple of days, and they found it at the Evangelical Covenant Church in Lafayette, Indiana. And there it is, the Lynchburg Covenant Church's Good Shepherd. It hung in their lobby until 2006, but now, as you can see, it's in storage. And what that are members of the Covenant Church want to do about that? Well, it's your 150th anniversary this year. So that was quite a fun surprise for all of us. Next slide, please.
Yeah, that was pretty good detective work by Tom and his family, I think, and hopefully the local Covenant Church can at least make a contact and see what can be done about that. That pretty much concludes our program for this evening. We did want to mention that on Saturday we have this idea for a self-guided tour. There are some maps that will be outside here. Each of the churches that you have seen, with the exception of the Covenant Church, each of those churches will be open from 1 to 5 on Saturday, and we encourage you to go, not just to look at the altar paintings that you've seen here, but also some of the other artwork that you would find in any of those congregations. Messiah Church has some decorative stars made by Lester Raymer. Bethany Church, if you look at their altar, the statuary on the altar there is really, really beautiful stuff, and I think quite what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, you'll like it. Other churches will be happy to show you some of the art that they have. Stained glass windows in each of these congregations can be gorgeous. Hopefully the sun is shining that afternoon and you can get the full effect of that. One final thing is that you can't really see it very well, but behind the screen here there is an altar painting which was done by Fern Aspelin Cole, who has relatives in the area. Merle Nelson would be a nephew. This painting was done by her in 1940 and hung in the Dwight, Kansas Presbyterian Church for 75 years until the church closed. And the family acquired it and in 2017 gave it to Bethany College with the idea that it would be used here in the Pearson Chapel. So it's not well displayed at this point, but we'll see what happens with it. Questions? One back here.
I don't know much about art. What style would you call it? Most of these, all of these
I'm not an art historian nor a critic. I'd say Christian. I can't answer the question. But I will say this, if you notice the two large ones at Bethany Church, Lazarus Awakening and the Ascension, they're not anywhere near the style we think of Sansein. This was a much more muted, much more quiet, classical style, I guess I'd say, rather than the impressionistic style that he developed later.
Pyrography is the art of wood burning. And if you can do, they used to have wood burning on belts and things like that, but it was quite an art form in its time. And it was one of the things that was taught here at Bethany College in the first decade of the 20th century as part of the Sloyd movement, along with homemaking and economics and sewing and quilting and all those other kinds of industrial and home economics arts.
What were the most surprising things that each of you learned?
I don't know.
The Covenant Church painting.
That probably has to be it for me as well. Even though that was Tom's end of the discovery, that was impressive work, I think.
Yeah, we were just delighted to come out, and Kevin Larson was so helpful in us. He told us, I sat and looked at that painting for like 13 years. I think he's back there. Kevin's in the back row. We're glad he's here tonight.
Perhaps did it with reflection and a reminder and a sense of reverence. Sue?
I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together, so we can see all the beautiful paintings around our area.
Well, Well, again, thank you for that. I'm going to turn this around on you and tell you that if you really enjoyed this, there is a donation basket as you leave, which does not go to Tom nor to me. It goes to support the Messiah Festival of the Arts. So if you are so inclined, it's on the table outside as you leave. Yes?
Would you think of doing a similar program with the stained glass windows that are in so many churches?
I had,
Because I grew up at the Salem Church.
Mhm.
We had fantastic.
yeah, hadn't thought about it. Hadn't thought about it. One of the rose windows at Messiah Church is my great-grandfather's memorial. So that might be an interesting idea.
And somebody will know the history of when I was a little girl, Pastor Gusenius's wife would gather the children around some of the windows, and the one that had Jesus and the children was a certain window, and they were manufactured in Germany. And the order for the church, for the picture of Jesus and the children, was to have Jesus and 3 children. When it came, there were 5 children.
Well, Tom, you've got a story about the Salesburg stained glass, don't you?
Yeah, this story out of Salesburg is really interesting. It was Pastor Erickson was pastor at the time when the church burned down, and he started to build the 2-tower church that's there now. And so he contracted with the Jacoby Glass Company out of St. Louis to do stained glass windows for Salesburg. And then the representative came out and he said, how in the world could there be this cathedral out here in the middle of nowhere? And he said, we have to do something special. And so then they went back to St. Louis, and the Jacoby Glass Company ordered those windows from Bavaria to have them shipped here. And when they arrived, they came to the depot in Smolin, and there's Ramona Jaden sitting there, and her uncle Axel was in charge of that. And they loaded those stained glass windows on wagons, and then they stood and they walked those teams the 4 miles to Salesburg at a walking pace so they wouldn't crack a window. And they got them there, and they installed them without one of them being even cracked. But the Jacoby Glass Company was so taken with that building there that they lost a fortune on that contract to get those beautiful windows that are there. And when you come on Saturday, I hope the sun is shining because they're really magnificent. Any other questions for us? Yes?
You said there'll be someone at the church from 1 to 5, all these churches, so they would be able to lead us to where we wanted to see the thing?
Yes, there will be somebody there during that time, yeah, and pick up a map on the counter outside so that you can make your way there. But somebody be at each of these churches to welcome you and to share the beauty of our altar paintings and all of our stained glass windows. Anyone else have a question?
There'll be egg, coffee, and tea ready.
Only if you bring them right. Thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.
So where did the fallen church sit in relationship to the cemetery? I didn't know they'd moved it.
I don't really know.
Okay.
But it was right there.
Yeah.
You know, somewhere close by.
Do you think it would have been north or
Either
on
north
the
or
cemetery somewhere?
probably on the cemetery.